Welcome back to Punctual Politics, the podcast that breaks down the biggest political stories of the week, clearly, quickly, and right on time. I'm Dawson, and today's lineup has everything from international diplomacy to domestic controversy. We'll start with the Gaza ceasefire plan and its 20 key points. Then move on to the Supreme Court's latest decision on Alex Jones, Donald Trump's unexpected Medal of Freedom recipient, a new Bible-based English curriculum in Texas, and updates from Alaska and Mississippi where tragedy has struck. We'll close with Trump's planned meeting with Argentina's leader as the U.S. moves ahead with a major bailout. Let's get into it. After almost 2 years of fighting, Israel and Hamas have agreed to a temporary ceasefire brokered by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States. The deal announced this week is being called a roadmap to de-escalation. But the real test will be whether both sides follow through. So what's in this 20-point plan? It starts with the basics, a halt to all rocket and airstrikes, followed by the release of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners in coordinated stages. It also includes expanded humanitarian access, allowing more food, fuel, and medical supplies into Gaza under international supervision. Longer-term points aim for reconstruction, border security reforms, and eventually renewed talks on a two-state framework, something the international community has pushed for years but rarely seen progress on. Still, skepticism is high. Israeli officials have warned that any violation could end the truce immediately, while Hamas leaders are demanding guarantees that Israel won't resume strikes once the initial phase ends. For civilians in Gaza, the pause brings a rare sense of relief. Hospitals are restocking, and families are reuniting after months of displacement. But as analysts point out, without accountability and political will on both sides, even a 20-point plan could just become another piece of paper in a long, tragic history. Heading back into the U.S., the Supreme Court has officially denied Alex Jones's appeal to avoid paying the nearly $1.5 billion in damages he owes to the families of Sandy Hook victims. This decision effectively ends Jones's legal road. The conspiracy theorists had argued that the defamation judges violated his free speech rights. But every lower court and now the Supreme Court disagreed. To recap, Jones spent years spreading false claims that the 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting was a hoax staged by the government to push gun control. Those lies led to years of harassment and threats against grieving families. The families sued and won big. A Connecticut jury ordered Jones to pay massive damages for defamation and emotional distress. Jones has since filed for bankruptcy, claiming he cannot afford to pay, but the courts have been skeptical. The Supreme Court's refusal to hear his case is a powerful statement. Defamation isn't free speech. Free expression protects opinion and political dissent, not deliberate and harmful falsehoods. For the families, this ruling brings some long-awaited closure. For Jones, it marks the end of a decade-long saga that reshaped the boundaries of online misinformation and accountability. Next up, President Donald Trump has announced that he plans to award the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, to Charlie Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA. Trump praised Kirk as, quote, a fearless patriot who's inspired millions of young Americans to stand up for their country and for God. Supporters say the move recognizes Kirk's impact in mobilizing a new generation of conservative activists. Critics argue it politicizes the Medal of Freedom, historically reserved for figures like Rosa Parks, Maya Angelou, or John Lewis, by using it as a partisan reward. It's not the first time Trump has made a controversial selection for this honor. During his first presidency, he gave it to figures like Rush Limbaugh and Jim Jordan, signaling how culture wars increasingly shape even ceremonial decisions in American politics. In Texas, a new English curriculum infused with biblical references is stirring debate about the role of religion in public education. The state's new standards, approved by the Texas State Board of Education, encourages teachers to incorporate biblical themes and moral lessons into reading and writing instruction. Officials argue it's about teaching cultural literacy, helping students understand references that have shaped Western literature. But critics say the curriculum crosses a constitutional line. Groups like the ACLU and Americans United for Separation of Church and State argue that it effectively promotes Christianity in public schools, violating the First Amendment. One example lesson asks students to analyze the book of Genesis as literature, exploring its narrative structure and moral lessons before comparing it to modern texts. Another lesson includes biblical references and vocabulary exercises. Supporters counter that the Bible's influence on English literature is undeniable, and understanding it is part of being an educated reader. Opponents respond that such teaching can easily slip into religious endorsement, especially in younger grades. This curriculum is part of a broader push in conservative states to bring religion back into classrooms, from Florida's new moral education standards to Oklahoma's proposal requiring the 10 Commandments in every classroom. The question, as always, is where education ends and indoctrination begins. Now to Alaska, where devastating floods this week have left at least one person dead and 2 others missing after torrential rains caused rivers to overflow in the state's southeast region. Emergency crews have been airlifting residents to safety, and the governor has declared a state of emergency in several counties. The flooding follows what experts are calling an unprecedented rainfall event, linked to warmer ocean temperatures and shifting storm patterns, a stark reminder of how climate change is intensifying in extreme weather, even in places like Alaska. The U.S. Geological Survey says rainfall totals in some areas exceeded 10 inches in 48 hours, a record for this time of year. For a state that's often seen as rugged and self-reliant, these floods show just how vulnerable remote communities are to environmental disasters. As rebuilding begins, local officials say it could take months and millions of dollars to repair the damage. The FBI announced Monday that 3 individuals, Tavion L. Powell, William Bryant, and Morgan Lattimore, have been charged with capital murder in connection with the deadly shooting. A 4th person, Latoya A. Powell, has been arrested and charged with attempted murder. The tragedy unfolded in downtown Leland shortly after a high school football game where crowds had gathered together for homecoming celebrations. The FBI spokesperson said the shooting appears to have been sparked by a disagreement among several individuals, though no clear motive has yet been released. Eyewitness Camish Hopkins described the scene as harrowing, saying that multiple people lay wounded or lifeless on the pavement, shoes abandoned nearby, and blood staining the street. It was the most horrific scene I'd ever seen, Hopkins told reporters. Of the 6 victims, 4 were pronounced dead at the scene, and the others died later. At least 14 people were injured in the chaos. And finally, President Trump is set to meet with Argentina's President Javier Milei as the U.S. moves forward with a multi-billion-dollar financial aid package to stabilize Argentina's economy. Milei, a self-described anarcho-capitalist, swept to power last year on promises to slash government spending, dollarize Argentina's economy, and rebuild ties with the U.S. Trump and Milei have developed a surprisingly warm rapport. Both are outsiders who campaign on anti-establishment energy and social conservatism. Their upcoming meeting is being billed as private, but it's expected to touch on trade, energy investment, and ongoing bailout negotiations. The U.S. Treasury and IMF have been working on a $10 billion aid deal to help Argentina curb inflation and stabilize its currency. Critics worry that Trump's involvement could politicize the process, especially if he's seen as influencing foreign policy before the election. Still, the meeting highlights how American politics increasingly intertwine with global populism and how figures like Milei are shaping new right-wing alliances around the world. So, from a fragile ceasefire in Gaza to floods in Alaska and political moves that blur the line between religion and governance, this week shows how interconnected politics really are, across countries, courts, and classrooms. Each story reflects the same underlying tension, how power, belief, and accountability collide in today's world. Whether it's misinformation punished by the Supreme Court or scripture written into Texas classrooms, the question keeps repeating: who gets to define truth and who gets to enforce it? That's all for today's episode of Punctual Politics. I'm Dawson Iasillo, and thank you so much for tuning in and staying informed. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the Daily Nebraskan YouTube. We will not have an episode next week, so stay tuned for our next episode in 2 weeks.